Good when you are. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's
Sweet.
good.
Ari, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, mate.
So, give us a bit of background on who you are and how you got into the field of psychology.
Cool. So, my entry into psychology was very different to most, I think. I started off with finishing year 12, and I got into a Bachelor of Economics to
Mm,
start with. I did that for about a year. Didn't really like it. Transferred over to business and commerce.
mm,
And I think at that age, it just sounded cool, really. It just sounded like a good area to go down. Didn't really know what I needed to do. And finished that, and then stumbled into psychology through a mate. Actually, he was studying psychology, and we were just chatting. Actually, being young adolescent males, he said that his psychology subjects were full of women, and my business subjects weren't. And I said I'll do an elective with you, and he ended up leaving psychology and studying something else, and I
consider-
signed up for the whole thing. So yeah, don't know if it's as yeah as admirable as a lot of other stories, but.
And so, what's your experience in the field? What are you kind of working in now?
My main area of focus is kids. So I've worked with children and adolescents my whole career essentially. I've done a
Mm,
little bit of work with adults, but the majority has been with kids. Um, Started off working with juvenile justice. So did a range of things with them. Was there for about 9 years in total. And that was a real eye opener. That was also part of the transition between going from a business degree to psychology, where I was
mm,
sort of enrolled in a business degree, doing some shifts as a guard, um, just as a casual job, and then working in that field started to change my perspective on things, and
mm.
delved into psychology through there. So yeah, stayed there for that. That was a big part of my career, and then moved over to the school system. Worked
Yep.
there for probably about 4 years, I'd say, all up.
And what were you doing there?
I did a range of things. I was a school psychologist throughout, but worked at a whole heap of different schools. And a big role was working with people from refugee backgrounds, so
Mm,
newly arrived, huge trauma histories, really significant stuff, like stuff people from the Middle East, a lot of African countries, anywhere where there's war at the moment, really. And
mm,
we'd go to schools and we'd try and help the staff out, help the teachers, professional development, or workshops around working with trauma, and
mm.
trying to support kids who've experienced trauma. And then moved up to the coast and got into CAMS, which is child and adolescent mental health,
Mhm.
and that was really cool. That was part of Gosford Hospital, and that was really really cool in understanding that more clinical side of things, and high risk mental health as well. Kids that are presenting
Mm.
with suicidal behaviours and you know complex mental health needs. And then got back into the schools here for a few years, and now I'm the majority of my work's with working with kids with autism and ADHD.
There you go. So a bit of everything.
Bit of everything now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, talk to me about some of your experiences in the juvie, and yeah, you're obviously studying psychology at the same time as working as guard there. That would have been getting some crazy insights to be working in it with a lot of people that you're learning about at uni, while you're studying it. Like, yeah, you would have had some crazy revelations.
Yeah, yeah, unimaginable stuff. Yeah, I remember early on it was a real culture shock for me because I
Mm,
sort of grew up in a pretty reasonable family. Like mum and dad were really supportive, looked after me well.
mm,
So you go into this different demographic where they've experienced a really serious trauma. I think that's probably the bulk of the kids in that system.
mm,
Just really traumatized kids, and um, it really changed the way I looked at everything. It changed the way I looked at the world,
mm.
and it was an adjustment. I remember a kid swearing to me right in front of my face when I was there for I've only been there for a couple of weeks,
Mm.
and the heart was pumping, and I was furious and scared and upset, and
Yeah.
at the same time I had to keep working as well. So I'm trying to shake that off, and seeing kids actively engaging in suicide attempts and,
Mm.
cutting ligatures of kids' necks, and they're blacked out and you're calling the ambulances and stuff like that. So I guess it's such a stressful environment. You sort of don't think about it till you move away, and
Mm.
you sort of look back and you go, wow, it was pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of the prominent experiences, psychological wise, that you had?
It really changed my understanding around trauma.
Mm.
I went from looking at a lot of those issues that those kids had from a behavioral setting. I went away from that into more, what happened to this poor kid and they're functioning in this way.
Mm.
I had one example, I think it was probably the most extreme one, and it was about a week before my honours thesis was due, actually, and I was pretty stressed with that, pretty consumed with that, and we had this shift where I had to restrain a young girl, and she bit me. She had regurgitated some of her lunch in a cup, and essentially threw vomit at me. And again, like looking at that from a security perspective, that's like that's a young person being aggressive towards me, but I was looking at it in a different way where she was petrified. So
Mm.
a male coming up, essentially putting her to the ground, handcuffing her, putting her in a room. She did whatever she could at that point. So yeah, I got covered in vomit, and then got bitten, and I had to go and get blood tests and stuff because
Yeah.
you know making sure that everything was all right there. And yeah, I had to go have a shower and try and finish off my thesis.
Cool.
So yeah, that's that environment, and it's yeah, I take my hat off to people that are involved in it, because I don't think you realize how extreme it is till you move away from it and you think, geez, that's not
Mm.
every day.
So you're looking
Right.
retrospectively.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when you're in there, that's pretty standard. So you just keep going.
Yeah. What's the procedure like? Do you have any psychological assistance there? Like, obviously, guards are kind of facing this every day. Um, if this was to happen on the street, that'd be a pretty crazy assault. But this is every day for you guys. Do you have assistance or kind of help there?
To be honest, when I was there, not a huge amount. And I remember in that specific example that I mentioned, I remember it just wasn't sitting right with me. I just didn't have a good feeling about it. Felt really bad for the kid, um, and raised it with a manager, and they basically viewed it from an operational perspective, and they looked at it, in terms of the restraint and what we did.
Mm.
We followed all procedures, so they just said, "Yeah, you did everything right. You got nothing to worry about." And I remember then I was sort of sitting there, and it just still wasn't feeling right. And that was probably a really big turning point for me into saying, "Look, there's a lot more to it than just the behaviors. You've really got to look at that." And I think for staff working in there, it might be a protective thing just to look at the behaviors and not think too much about it.
Yeah.
I don't know what supports they get now, but at the time, we didn't get too much.
It wasn't much.
It'd
Yeah.
be, go to the pub and have a couple of beers at the end of your
Shift.
6 shifts, and yeah.
Jeez.
But having said that, it was really good team camaraderie, and there was a lot of really good people in there.
Mm.
So there was always people to bounce ideas off and have a chat to, but in terms of getting professional help, I don't think there was anything formal there for it.
Yeah. What's the psychology of the inmates there? What are you seeing mostly? Are you seeing a lot of neurodivergence? Are you seeing drugs? What are you looking at?
I was there, I think I started there in 2008 and I finished up at around 2017. And the understanding around autism was almost non-existent. I think we had a very, very select few kids that had autism diagnoses.
Mm.
The majority had more of those externalizing behaviors. So your ADHD diagnoses, ODD, conduct disorder, um, attachment disorders. But in terms of autism, again, looking back, there would be a lot of kids that would fit that bill.
Mm.
They just weren't picked up. Yeah, again, when you think of an autism diagnosis, there's a lot to it.
Mm.
You got to go through all the pathways and get the assessments done. And a lot of these kids didn't have those sort of support networks in place.
Yeah.
You're talking kids that are bouncing in and out of different foster homes and placements and short-term type accommodation, and, really complex family dynamics. So,
Mm.
by the time they're 15 or 16, they're maybe not getting assessed and not getting the support that they need, and they end up in in these sort of settings. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of that. A story I had once, I remember this girl, in hindsight again, we were pretty sure she would have should have had an autism diagnosis, and she threw a brick into the window of a police station. And really, again, like real rigid type thinking. We were sort of questioning it. We're thinking, what sort of silly behavior would that be? Like,
Yeah.
of course you're going to get in trouble, right? Like, you're throwing a brick into the window of a police station.
What's the function?
Yeah, like you throw it anywhere else except for there. But she looked at it from that perspective. She wanted to go back in. Home life wasn't very good. She enjoyed her first day in there, so she got out. She hadn't been out for long. Threw a brick into the window and thought, look, I know if I throw a brick into the window of a police station, I was guaranteed to go back to juvie. So
Yeah.
really, really concrete sort of thinking, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And also, didn't want to hurt anyone either. So just thought, if I throw it into the window of the police station, I'll get in trouble, cause a bit of damage, hopefully not hurt anyone, and that'll be it.
God.
So there was a lot of funny stories. Again, looking back at it, you sort of think and you reflect on it, and say, there's been a lot more than what we were aware of.
How would you say trauma presents differently in men and women in that regard, or juvenile men and women?
It was tricky because I worked, the majority of my time there was with the girls. And to put it into perspective, at the time, there was around 300 kids in the state that were locked up. So there's probably around 7 or 8 juvenile justice centres across New South Wales. I don't know the exact number, but there was around 270 boys and about 30 girls at one time. So the girls that we had there were the, real pointy end. So they had a lot of the externalizing type behaviors, aggression, and, ranging from, petty theft, assaults, all the way through. There was some there for murder. I guess the biggest issue in what I saw with the two genders was, I think if there was going to be an issue between inmates, the boys would probably be so much more impulsive, or they definitely would be so much more impulsive. If they had an issue with someone, it'd be a physical fight within about 30 minutes, and it'll all be over. Whereas the girls, there was a lot more of that relational bullying, like isolating girls, and it'd be more of a slow burn. And if there was physical conflict, it'd be over a prolonged period. But probably the other issue, that the difference between the two was, girls at that age just had a lot more access to drugs. Being in that sort of, teenage period, working in the city, prostitution, and just being in that sort of crowd, young girls just had a lot more access to drugs and higher volumes of drugs, and also heavier drugs. Whereas the boys, just that was something that was far less in what I saw.
Would you say that the boys would gravitate more towards trying to access the drugs than the girls would then?
In terms of them getting into trouble, or?
Yeah, like if they've already got access to it, what would you?
They'd be trying to get the money
every time they could.
Source a bit of income, and then spend it on drugs, and it would always be, smaller amounts. I remember doing drug and alcohol assessments, and some girls would be using $1,000 a day, and that was 10 years ago. So God, with the price of inflation and things like that, it'd be a lot more now. So so the boys, they're probably using $20 or $100 if they could, and that'd be a high level of use for a boy at that point.
What's the prevalence of ADHD?
In the girls, not so much. Again, if you think of ADHD, there's, by and large, girls are more likely to present with that inattentive type ADHD, and they're a bit harder to diagnose as well. Boys, I think we would have, I would say it was something around 90%, from memory. I don't know, that's not an exact number, but it was almost a given. Like when a boy would come in, you almost wouldn't even look at the diagnosis, because you could almost guarantee they had an ADHD diagnosis, and there was a high likelihood that they'd have either ODD or conduct disorder, or both, and there may be some mood disorder as well. But you almost overlooked the ADHD diagnosis. It was that common.
For those who are listening, might not come from psych background, how do you define ODD and conduct disorder, and how do you differentiate between the two?
Okay, so I guess it's a tricky one because if you think of ODD very broadly, it's, um, difficulties working with authority figures, working with adults, working with people in positions of power. And
ODD is oppositional defiance
sorry,
disorder. Sorry, that's
opposition
okay.
to
Yeah,
defiance. So
no, just thought
yeah,
I'd clarify.
that's right. And that was, if you think about what it takes to enter a juvenile justice system,
Mm.
is a lot of oppositional behaviours.
Yeah.
So that was probably something that you'd see a lot more of. And again, trying to merge that in with trauma and understanding someone's background would be very tricky because if you think about someone who's emotionally distressed, they're more likely to tell someone to get lost or
Mm.
lash out or, not comply to instructions or anything like that, which are all those sort of, again, very broadly speaking, they're the trademarks of ODD. So
Mm.
um, that was something that was pretty common with all of the kids. But again, trying to differentiate between a kid who's got ODD versus someone who's, had a really hard start to life
Mm.
and been abused and had all sorts of tough things happen to them,
Mm.
is tricky. And your conduct disorder is probably, if I could really simply put it, it's a step above ODD, a lot more calculated antisocial behavior.
Mm.
In adults, it's defined as antisocial
Yeah.
personality disorder, but it's I guess people that are more conscious and more overt in their behaviors
Yeah.
and um, I guess more likely to
More deliberate.
more deliberate. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably a better word of put a better way to say it. More deliberate in what they're doing. And I found, I think if you would deal with the trauma in those juvenile justice centers, you wouldn't get too many kids that would fit that bill for conduct disorder. But again,
Mm.
when they walk in, probably I would say half of them would have a diagnosis. In terms of the boys, half of them would have a conduct disorder diagnosis.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know where it's at now. Like I said, it's been nearly a decade, but
Yeah.
hopefully things have changed a bit and understanding around trauma has improved. So
Yeah. You mentioned before the main reasons as to why a lot of the women were in the juvenile centers. What were the prominent factors for the boys?
similar sort of demographics. So if I could put it simply, most of the boys were either friends or siblings with the
Mm.
girls that were in custody. So similar sort of networks.
Mm.
The risk factors that were pretty consistent were adverse childhood experiences. So to explain that, you're talking about physical abuse, substance use in the home, domestic violence in the home, or absent parents.
Mm.
Parents in prison or with criminal problems as well. That was consistent for both. So you sort of think if you've got girls in one family that are presenting with that, the boys are not going to be too far away in terms of
Yeah.
those juvenile justice centers. And then going up, your other risk factors like not going to school, dropping out of school really early,
Mm.
and then financial issues. I think it was almost unheard of to have a kid from a well-to-do type area because they normally get access to more support at
Yeah.
an earlier age, and
Yeah.
by the time they get to court, if they ever did, they'd have a lot of supports in place, and the court system is really unlikely to put a child into a juvenile justice center for no reason. It's more
Yeah.
around looking at it as a last resort.
Mm.
So essentially, you've got kids from low socioeconomic backgrounds,
Yeah.
trauma histories, complex family issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the prevalence of reoffending?
Again, I don't know in terms of the up-to-date stats, but at the time when I was there, it was over 90%. So it was
Yeah.
pretty
Wow.
high. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty high, which is unfortunate. It was a tricky one too because I think we saw a lot of success with kids that had longer term stays,
Mm.
longer custodial settings, and normally that'd be either they had offended a lot
Mm.
and they ended up with a longer sentence, or they'd done something pretty serious.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, when you're in a juvenile justice center and you're doing well, you have access to school, you have access to all your medical help,
Yeah.
whatever medications you need. You've got food consistently. And I know that sounds really basic, but a lot of these kids didn't have that. So
Yeah, especially
all those,
medical help. It's
yeah,
expensive, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like all your medications there for you every day. You don't have to go to a chemist and try and find the money to buy it and
Yeah.
keep on top of it. You get called to the nurse and they basically give it to you and you have it
Yeah.
at the same time every day. And that consistency of, waking up at the same time, having your breakfast at the same time, going to bed at the same time,
Yeah.
going to school throughout the day. The longer you do that, when we look at those risk factors that brought them in there,
Mm.
the level of risk starts to go down. I think the challenge is then, how do you match that when they get out?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of conversation around the prison system as a whole. And I think a lot of people use the Danish prison system as a good example as to an alternative option. I think a lot of critique from that comes from the fact that, at least in Australia, the people that are in our prison systems are not the same as people in the Danish prison system, and that there's a lot of other factors contributing to why people are entering these systems as well. If you can't afford your medication, or you're not eating every day, or you're not eating, for some people, days on end. So to be in that system and get regular food and things like that, it's almost better than what the option is outside of it.
Yeah. And that goes back to that example with the young girl that threw the brick into the police station, had a look at her life outside and thought, no, I'm better off in there.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, but that's just the way it is for some people.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinguish to make that, the Danish prison system worked well because the community that they were reintroducing to was full of supports and structure. Whereas here, when they're released, they're just going back into the environment that put them in there in the first place.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and is that analogy of it takes a village.
Mm.
I know that's another factor I probably didn't mention, having that network of support around you, family support, or
Mm.
good friends and pro-social influences around you.
Yeah.
That's a big protective factor as well. And I always think if something happened to me, I've got 2 kids, and I know that there'd be 20 or 30 people that would be able to look after them.
Yeah.
Whereas some people don't have that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Something that you and me have both bonded over a while ago was our shared interest of boxing. Tell me about your experience in the world of boxing, and what are the kind of benefits that you see from people choosing to take a sport that is maybe a bit more violent.
Yeah, cool. Look, I will disclose I'm not a professional boxer or anything like that. I haven't fought for any world titles. Um, but I've always loved the sport, actually. I remember I actually went to a show in Marrickville. I think it was somewhere in the city anyway, and I was in year 5. I remember it was in year 5. I was in year 5, and at the time it was the Kelly brothers, Glenn Kelly and Kevin Kelly. They were the headline acts, and I was captivated by it. I thought this was incredible, really brutal, but at the same time, really captivating as well.
Yeah.
And I sort of dabbled in it, went to the PCYC and did some stuff as a teenager, and then did some stuff at a gym in Sydney as a young adult, and still, always loved it. I think for me growing up, the gyms that I was involved in, like sort of, in Western Sydney, there's a lot of rough characters in there. So, it can make a lot of people feel a bit uncomfortable as well. So I sort of did it for a bit, and then would drift in and out and not really commit to it. But yeah, I got saw the Red versus Blue program with G6, and I had a chat to the owner one day, and I said, I'll do it one day. I'll make sure that I do it. And jumped on a few years ago now. I was 35, nearly 36 at the time, so I was a little bit older, and I thought it's, if I don't do it now,
Yeah.
it might be a bit too late. So I've got to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic in terms of overall personal growth and
Mm.
an understanding of your body physically and also psychologically as well.
Mm.
You know, being able to manage your emotions and manage that threat response in your brain, and being able to stay, I guess the word is regulated when
Mm.
you're being attacked and getting
Yeah.
punched in the face,
Yeah.
and trying to manage your anxiety and you know, that tug of war in your body between going into that fight flight mode and trying to stay calm and regulated. That was really, really cool. And I almost, I guess I worked on myself for 12 weeks as
Yeah.
a psychologist and a client as well. So I
Yeah.
did a bit of work on that.
Yeah.
And that was probably the biggest thing I got out of it, like being able to stay calm and composed when under attack. And
Mm.
that's probably not a normal thing for most people.
I think it's beneficial as well. In my experience working with younger kids, I used to work with a lot of shy type kids that were maybe getting picked on at school or something. For them, learning to box was a great opportunity to build confidence. And especially as a male, I think this is hard for a lot of people to relate to, but if you are getting picked on as a male in school, it's quite often physical. And so you do need to build confidence that you can stand up for yourself in that case if you need to. The misconception with boxing in that regards is you're not teaching people to be violent or teaching people to instigate. You're giving them the tools and the confidence to be able to defend themselves if they need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beneficial for a lot of the kids that are getting picked on, but I think as well for a lot of women. I used to coach with a few teen girls, and for them they were really shy and introverted at first. When they built the confidence to be able to, physically exert themselves and in a sport that is so uncomfortable, yeah, I saw them build a lot of confidence and character out of that. So I think it's a super important thing.
Definitely. And I think it's become a lot more mainstream where it's accessible to
Mm.
everybody.
Yeah.
I think if I go back to my first sparring session when I was, maybe 20 years old, there was some guy that, and this is true, he was covered in, I remember he had a neck tattoo, he was covered in tats, just got out of prison not long ago,
Yeah.
and beat me up, to be fair. But it's a pretty intimidating environment. It was a pretty intimidating environment.
Yeah.
And when I was preparing for this Red versus Blue, it was all walks of life,
Mm.
all ages, men, women, yeah, all sorts of really cool backstories. But yeah, it just opened the door for so many other people. So I think now we're seeing everybody jumping on board, and it's allowing people to build all those skills that you mentioned. The confidence and
Yeah.
the ability to not so much defend yourself, but being comfortable enough to stay composed when there is threat. And like you said, doesn't necessarily mean fighting or becoming aggressive. It's just maintaining your composure in all sorts of different situations.
I agree. One of the things that you learn in therapy very early on would be to understand when I'm getting dysregulated, for starters, but also how do I regulate myself when I'm feeling dysregulated. And I think for boxing, that's something you have to learn, or you don't do well at all. If you're completely dysregulated when you're trying to box, you'll just end up getting hurt.
Yes.
For a lot of people, it's learning that in a very real environment. Whereas, in conversational, it's, oh, I'm getting dysregulated, I'm going to bring this up or whatever. But in a physical environment, you're only going to get hurt if you're dysregulated. So you have to regulate and be able to understand, like, oh, I need to take a breath, I need to calm down, or try and control my behavior. I think it's transferable into a lot of different areas of life as well.
100%. Yeah, that was a big thing that I learned. I think it was week 1, first sparring session. Got hit with a few shots, and natural survival instinct was to put my head down and close my eyes and put my hands in front of my face and hope for the best. But in a boxing sense, that's the worst thing you can do, because then you're
Yeah.
just a sit and target. And I remember one of the trainers was saying, don't close your eyes, don't put your head down. And that's all I could hear. But in my own mind, that survival part of my brain was saying, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
trying to keep you safe in this moment. So that was a bit of a wake up call for me, where I said, well, I have to try and spread out my ability to stay regulated here.
Yeah.
And I did that through, your standard exposure type work. My aim, and after that first week, I remember I made a decision that I have to get in and spar as often as possible with everybody. You know, like I
Yeah.
couldn't really shy away, and I needed to almost accept that I was going to get beaten up
Yeah.
week in, week out. And I really made a point to try and spar guys that were bigger and better.
Mm.
And week by week, I could see the difference, and I was able to tolerate just that little bit more. And I'd still sort of close my eyes every now and then, but that was reducing. And then got to the point where towards the end, you know, you could sit there and get hit, and you still see everything happening, and you're still figuring stuff out. And yeah, all these little clues that your thinking brain's still on.
Yeah. A lot of people don't actually understand that when you first start, the level of adrenaline, the effect of that fight or flight response is so strong.
Yeah.
And people go, oh, you know, it's a sport for Neanderthals or something like that, and there is the brain damage element to it. But some boxers that I know are the most composed people I've ever met, and they're able to handle themselves in adversity, and I think that's a skill that not a lot of people actually have.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I looked at it as well. To paint a picture, the guy that I fought, he was younger, fitter, faster, stronger. You know, if it was purely down to the physical aspect, he would have beaten me pretty easily. And I'm, you know, happy to concede that. And I've always played sport, and I'm, you know, relatively fit, but I know my limitations. So I knew that if I had to compete purely on a physical sense, I wasn't going to get him. So I knew that my strength was that I, in a weird way, was a psychologist and had a bit more of an understanding around that side of things. So I had to use that to my advantage.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, I remember there was a sports psychologist, his name's Bill Bezic, and he has a book, and in one of the chapters, he says that he starts off all of his intervention with athletes asking him 3 questions, and it's, what do you want? How badly do you want it? And how much are you willing to suffer to get there? And I remember the mental side of it was one, but I did maximize myself physically as well. So I got to a point where I was at my best, and I know that still wasn't going to be enough to beat him if he was at his best, but I had to work really hard to get there. And I remember I looking back at it, actually, as I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about it, and I almost went insane. You know, like you sort of get to this point where it consumes you.
Yeah.
But I knew that I had to do something else other than just the physical to try and get the win. And yeah, I had to try and really build my brain up as much as I possibly could as well. And I think going back to working with young people, then I've been able to use a lot of those skills that I've learned, helping them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked for a while with high risk kids or high needs kids, especially in the autism sector. A lot of kind of violence as well, and restricted practices, things along those lines. And I found it, the thing that made me work so well with that group was the fact that I didn't find it dysregulating to be near someone that was dysregulated. And it's a wild thing to say that you can sit next to someone that's, you know, maybe smashing their face in or, you know, hitting someone else, and be able to co-regulate with them and follow a set of procedures to help bring them down. That was something that I found a lot of people that worked well in that sector had control of their own emotions, and they were able to sit in that space of being uncomfortable and not let it dictate their behavior.
Yeah.
I think that's directly the skill that I learned from boxing. Dr. Julie Smith, I forget what the name of her book is. She's a pretty famous author though. And she talks about, in her most recent book, she wrote a section on fear. It was actually on a podcast I listened to her talking. And she says she got to the end of writing the book and she was reviewing it before releasing it. As she was reviewing it, she got diagnosed with breast cancer.
Right.
She said she initially just deleted the entire section that she wrote on fear, because at that time it was very much choose to be uncomfortable, put yourself in positions that make you feel uncomfortable, and there was an element of fear to that. But she said as soon as she got diagnosed with breast cancer, she sat there and she was like, oh my God, I've never actually known what fear was. She says true fear is something that happens to you and not something that you choose to do. And so I think that kind of boxing element as well is like, yeah, you're choosing to be in there, but this other person is happening to you at the same time, and that's scary.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, there's that there's that whole trend a while ago about people doing ice baths and saunas. I love hot cold therapy, don't get me wrong, but a fair amount of people were, shouting that choose to be uncomfortable, choose to do this, choose to do that, and it's great for that element, but it's not true fear.
Yeah.
And I think that she rewrote that entire section and says the main driver that got her through that was taking action. And there's a certain amount of time that you need to spend sitting in that uncomfortable position to get your wits about you. But as soon as you've sat there for long enough, you need to take action and do something about it. And she says she just went to all the specialists, did all the research that she could, and really got on the front foot of trying to get through this. And that was the thing that helped her get through that. Super important to distinguish that I don't think a lot of people actually experience fear to the extent that maybe she has. But I think that the important lesson is that, you need to understand the difference between being uncomfortable and being scared as two different things.
Yeah.
And they take two different parts of you to be able to get through.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, a big part of a lot of mental health disorders, like your PTSD. A lot of it is that life-threatening experience that if you can get out of it and find a way out of it, by and large, the trauma symptoms down the track aren't as severe. It's the people that get stuck in these life-threatening situations that can't get out.
Yeah.
That lose that ability to control the moment, that normally have those residual trauma symptoms and struggle with things like PTSD down the track.
Yeah, it's the coping mechanism that maybe got them through it in the moment, but isn't actually adaptive to everything, and they just replicate it. Yeah,
exactly.
Did you see that a lot in your experience in the juvie setting?
To be honest, probably I don't think I was asking the right questions in the juvie setting. I think my understanding around trauma probably wasn't there, and wasn't looking at it deeply enough. But I think when I started working with a lot of young people from refugee backgrounds and hearing their stories, and then I could then start to see that a lot more. That the impact of trauma and simple things. I remember once something that really got me was a young person from I think it was Burma actually, and non-verbal, but we did some some play-based stuff, and looking at good and bad moments a lot across the timeline, and he had this one big black mark for represented a bad moment, and that was him having to leave his dog because he really wanted to bring his dog with him. But obviously, had to leave countries and flee a situation. He just left his dog at home, and to this day didn't know what happened to it. So that again, that's a similar thing to what you were saying in that real life trauma, that like when things are really on the line versus us jumping into an ice bath when while watching Fox Sports, or having a towel there ready to go and a nice hot shower whenever you want it. But I think it's good that people are trying to understand a little bit more around that survival response. I think that's really important. But yeah, like you said, there's no substitute for the real thing, right?
Yeah, there's levels to it for sure. Yeah, even just living in Australia, you're kind of protected to a certain extent.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I say that a lot to my own family. Like, you sort of look back and you think, oh, we've got it pretty good when we can pick and choose all these little things, or get worried about all these things that aren't really really big in the grand scheme of things.
How much of it do you think is you have to experience the other side of it to appreciate it? Like, the grass is always greener until you walk through a muddy paddock, right?
Yeah. Look, again, it's a really hard one to try and explain. I've never experienced anything anywhere near what the clients I've worked with have had to experience. I couldn't really tell you if I appreciate it enough, but probably understanding what other people have gone through gives me a little bit of a head start.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I think, until, I feel a bit of guilt if I leave my dog at home when I go to Bunnings, or if I go to the park and leave him at home, I feel bad. So, I can't really put myself into that young person's shoes, but I can understand that there'd be a lot of discomfort there, a lot of pain. So.
Yeah. So we spoke kind of earlier about your work now, and you're seeing a lot of effects from social media. on a lot of your clients? What are the kind of presentations you're seeing?
I guess a real eye opener for me was when I started working at child and adolescent mental health.
Mm,
Um, a lot more with females, I have to say, but there was a lot of the I guess the exposure to taunting and bullying, you know, before social media and especially mobile phones, having access to social media 24 hours a day.
mm,
You know, pretty simply, if you got bullied at school, you sort of finish at 3 o'clock and you go home. And if you had a pretty good life outside of school, you got some
yeah.
respite. But now, it can follow you into the toilet. I say that to kids where
Mm.
it's probably the only piece of technology where it follows us literally everywhere.
Yeah.
There's all these really cool cars and like all the cameras around here, but they stay here, like we leave them. We
Mm,
have a certain amount of control over them. We pick and choose when we use them.
yeah.
Whereas your phone, it follows you
Everywhere.
everywhere. And if you're getting picked on, then you're getting picked on everywhere too. So
Yeah.
it's pretty relentless. And I saw that a lot more with girls where Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist
Yeah.
in the US, he spoke a lot about the rise in things like depression and anxiety
Yeah.
since, I think it was 2012 or 2013 when
Mm,
things like Facebook and Instagram and all the chat group, social media became a lot more popular. Massive rise, more so in girls with things like depression and anxiety.
mm,
And I definitely saw that in child and adolescent mental health. It was a lot of girls coming in and just getting bullied day in and day out,
mm,
day and night, um, and almost getting drawn to continuing to check their phones. And even though it was,
yeah.
all bad, um, and they just get stuck in this really bad rut where they were, in a pretty bad way. A lot of them, like, a lot of girls were not so much suicidal in the sense that they thought their life was over and that they couldn't see any benefit, but just the level of distress and that inability
Mm,
to find a way out. And it's like,
yeah.
I don't necessarily want to die, but I'm so distressed right now that I don't know how to cope and I'm
Yeah.
overwhelmed. And
Can't get away from it.
yeah, and that was a lot of it.
Mm,
And a big part of it was that social media aspect and just the access to it. And I
mm,
think we spoke about it earlier where in the juvie, a lot of it was isolating other girls, like your bullying might not necessarily be fighting. It could be
yeah.
picking on one specific person or gossiping about someone or,
Yeah.
um, and getting people on board with you.
Mm,
And social media is a perfect
example.
vehicle for it.
Something that I got. Have you seen Adolescence, the series on Netflix?
No, but
Yeah.
that's on my list.
The-
So that's my next thing I have to watch.
It's definitely generated a lot of conversations. But yeah, one of the points I think they made in the last episode was the parents were saying that they didn't really know what their kid was doing in his room all the time. They knew that he was kind of on his phone or his computer, but they just thought he was watching videos or something. And I think that's definitely something that maybe a lot of the older generations struggle to understand is the online space and how damaging it can be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, most definitely. And I guess going back to a lot of the clients I work with now, I feel like community activities. So I've got a couple of kids that are enrolled in some community activities, but particularly sport
Mm,
is such a protective factor because, a lot of the neurodiverse kids do have hard times at school.
mm,
So having something positive to finish your day or, something different or people knowing you as someone different as that,
yeah.
you know, the kid with ASD or ADHD that,
Yeah.
gets in a bit of trouble or has some social issues at school,
Mm,
having, being known for something, if you're good at sport or,
yeah.
part of a team somewhere else can be a real protective thing. So if that's a challenge that I find with a lot of kids. If they're in their room for too long, it limits their exposure to all these other opportunities, and
Mm,
it almost creates that a different little version of the world for them, almost like
yeah.
another completely different environment, and it's very unreal.
Jonathan Haidt, you mentioned before, has a good point that it's not necessarily what we're consuming when we're spending time online. It's the things that we're missing out on. And, you know, you take
I've seen that post actually. Yeah.
you take a 12 or a 13-year-old who's supposed to be on this development trajectory, and now all of a sudden they're spending 5.5 hours a day at school and 6 hours a day on social media. And that time that they're spending online is not time outside learning to ride a bike or learning to communicate or socialize.
Yeah.
And those are the important steps for development that a lot of kids these days just aren't getting exposure to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. And I mean, on the flip side, there's a lot of benefits to
Mm,
using technology and social media, and there's a lot of good to it as well. I think it's a matter of controlling it and being
mm,
reasonable about it. I think if you were to, I don't know, I'm thinking of any other hobby, if you were to, you know, stay at the gym for 7 or 8 hours a day, that could be
yeah,
harmful as
bad.
well. So
Yeah.
it's about knowing when and where to use things and being in control of it. I think that's probably the biggest part of it.
Yeah.
Control and saying, look, I'll use it, but I'm still going to go out and enjoy those things that you mentioned, or, you know, I'm going to ride my bike at the same time, or
Yeah.
not at the same time as you're using social media. I just
Yeah.
preface that, but yeah, you got to have that balance in your life, I think,
Yeah.
and learning how to control it is going to be a big thing going forward, I think.
There's been more studies now that young teenage boys who aren't going out and socializing or playing sports and are spending a lot of time online are becoming more depressed, but they're also becoming more susceptible to maybe harmful or dangerous views that are being pushed online. And it's this population of boys that are depressed or don't have other things going on, that are just spending so much time online, that are the actual ones that are being affected by the whole space.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good point too. I think that's something that, again, you have to have an understanding around how that all those algorithms work. And I'm definitely not someone who's an expert on it, but
Mm,
you know, the more you surround yourself with a certain view or a certain group of people,
mm,
then the more that gets flooded into your
yeah.
channels and streams, and then that becomes normal because you think that that's the majority, whereas in fact
Mm.
it's probably a very small part of the world.
Yeah, well, even from a health perspective, we're looking at increasing rates of body dysmorphia. You spend hours a day on your phone looking at people that are, you know, pitch perfect, and I don't know how prominent Photoshop is online anymore, but you know, these influencers that maybe have their life is set up to be able to eat the cleanest, healthiest foods every day because they're getting paid to do so.
Yeah,
And maybe they have time to do 2 or 3 workouts a day, and they have these perfect morning routines that they say everyone should follow. And it's like, well, what about the person that's working 9 or 10 hours a day and is trying to support a family and do all these other things? Like, they can't afford that. They don't have the time to do that. If you're opening your phone and looking at the top tier of people that are across the world now, not just our immediate environment, no wonder comparison is contributing to a lot of these mental effects.
yeah, because
Yeah.
we only see that absolute best version of someone.
Mm,
We don't see
mm,
everything else. I remember on that point, a friend on Facebook had a baby, and posted, you know, the first photo of the baby, and her hair was done like not that I know much about hair, but um, her hair was it looked like it was done by a professional
yeah.
anyway.
If you're listening and you're not watching the video, Ari is bald for anyone.
Yeah. um, she had this like amazing hair, and I remember my wife commented on it. It's like, how does she look so beautiful after having a baby? 'Cause,
Mm,
um, and again, I don't know if my wife will ever listen to this, but my wife did not look like that when she had a baby. It was a horror movie, but that's the reality, right? And then
yeah.
this lady's posted something that's so different.
Mm,
Um, you know, probably a couple of hours of prep for it,
yeah.
taken into this one photo that a lot of people don't see, and
Yeah.
you know, then that becomes normal for a lot of people in terms of what they think is normal, and
Yeah.
then they don't meet that, and it can be pretty harmful, I think.
Yeah. Even just the example from like a relationship point of view, you know, uh, just rewind back to the 80s, and say you had a long-term relationship and you broke up with someone. It was like, well, that was the last point that you really saw them. And it was like, you wouldn't go through your day-to-day life seeing what they're doing every day now. Cool, we're gonna go our separate ways and live our own lives, and that's it. People are ending relationships now and having so much time to try and get over it because they're looking at what that person's doing every day still.
Yeah.
And they're constantly popping up in their phone. No wonder it's hard for people to get over someone if it's constantly being shoved in your face.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all aspects of that social media side of things can be good, but also can be harmful.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. I think that's a big part. And I guess people knowing a lot more than what they used to, like if you, again, I don't want to make this sound too cheeky, but if someone goes to the gym now, they normally tell people, or if they have a nice dinner with a partner, they'll tell people, and or they'll post a photo telling people, and
if
I don't know
if you don't post it, did it even happen?
That's right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
joke about that sometimes with friends where I'm like, maybe we should take a photo because no one will believe us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that side of it too, just being able to be in the moment and not having to have phones. Like I see it even with concerts where, everyone's got their phone out watching the concert through a phone, where making sure that everyone knows that they're at the concert. So it's tricky, right? And I guess I think ideally, if I could, I'd love for people to be able to put all the bad stuff too, like.
Yeah, definitely post the worst moments.
Yeah. And I do try. I know I'm not very big on social media, but when I do, I normally try and post something a bit silly. If, I think, something that goes wrong, maybe take a photo of that and just showing people that you're not perfect all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You've spent a bit of time working in the nutrition side of things. What's some of the key takeaways you've learned from that?
Yeah, look, it's a really emerging field in psychology, and I guess a lot of the stuff we've spoken about, there's so many factors that go into mental health, good or bad, and I think in all of the roles that I've had, a big part of the dysfunction was around food, exercise, sleep, your basic survival stuff.
Yeah.
And there's this growing body of research around nutritional psychology, and there's there's plans to start to incorporate that into our practice, and again, not to replace other forms of intervention, but just to add on to our work, because I think if we're not really looking at those basic survival needs well, and we're not addressing them, I don't think we're going to have much success with our clients. And that's the experience that I've had in my career, where you've got kids that are, possibly an example could be social media, being on till 3 or 4 in the morning, and then sleep's out of whack, waking up at midday, having a packet of chips for breakfast, and not going outside, not getting the sun, not riding their bike, all those things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think if you or I were to do that for a couple of days, we'd start feeling a bit crappy. So
I think there was a study published that said a single bad night of sleep makes you 30% more reactive to negative emotions.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was in CAMS at the hospital there, that was a big part of our initial sessions, where and I would say the majority of kids would come in with sleep disturbance, really poor diet, very, very little time outdoors.
Yeah.
I remember, like, one extreme was in terms of increasing exercise and exposure to being outdoors. We made one of the recommendations were, he goes and checks the letterbox every day, and that could be a 10-meter walk each way, but that was more than what he was getting beforehand. So, when you're so out of whack in those basics, it sounds really simple, but if you can get those right, then a lot of those, we would see a big improvement in a lot of mental health issues.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think if we don't as a field start to take it more seriously, we're going to be wasting a lot of our energy and our resources.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a big part of why I'm getting into it. And I think if you look at nutrition, it can be really complicated, and we don't need to know the ins and outs of it, but the basics around it, and then incorporating our own skills as psychologists to try and help people navigate choices around it, or understanding some of the mechanisms around why you're doing what you're doing, and how to get again a bit more of that control. A lot of I did a course not long ago on on nutritional psychology. And one of the key points that I took out of it was, rather than teaching people diet skills, you really want to be teaching them emotion regulation skills, because we're more likely, again, to make poor
That's
choices when our prefrontal cortex and the thinking part of the brain is not online. So
yes. I've had a bad day. I'm gonna order pizza in, and
yeah,
all of a sudden I've had a bad day 4 days of the week, and you have pizza, and
that's right. That's right. And
yeah,
in the short term, you know, emotional eating or taste, like when we eat for taste, that activates our reward system, our dopamine system.
yeah,
So we start to seek that out.
mm,
And it's pretty fascinating because it looks at all the changes that, you know, that one poor decision can then lead to 4 days or 5 days, and changes in our brain can happen within a week
yeah,
around
wow,
what we then start to value in terms of food and what we look for and what our body responds to. And
yeah.
um,
I normally try to do like meal preps for the week on a Sunday, and my Sunday afternoon routine is very, I would say I'm probably rigid with it, because I know if I don't set myself up for the week on a Sunday afternoon, I'm gonna fall down all the cracks.
yeah,
And so, if I don't, Monday comes around and I'm buying food. And if I'm buying food, then I'm gonna probably choose something that I want to eat that's tastier. And it's like, maybe it's not as healthy.
that's right.
And then, but then when am I going to do my next meal prep? Well, I'm probably going to do it on Wednesday now. And so then there's 3 days of bad eating. And so, yeah, it's very,
Yeah, and availability, like that's one part that it covers, where what's around you,
yeah,
and
yeah, definitely.
yeah, if you're hungry and your choices are, a couple of takeaway shops, well,
Yeah,
you're more likely to do it. But if you have
yeah,
your meal ready to go, it changes it.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are what's 2 or 3 points that you would leave our listeners on to kind of maximize their psychological health through their nutrition?
Oh, look, I would just see. I would try and explain nutrition as a continuum. So you got your homeostatic eating, which is your eating for survival,
Mm,
which is controlled by one part of the brain, and then your hedonic eating, which is eating for taste or pleasure.
mm,
And we're all on a continuum of that. So you don't really need to be at 100%
mm,
of one side, or eating well all the time. It's just sort of understanding where you fit on that continuum, and if you can improve it somewhat,
mm,
I think that'll be a really good starting point. And what that does, then, that just gives you, again, an element of control over what you're doing and an understanding, and
mm.
makes it a little bit more conscious.
Yeah,
And that's a big part of it. And I think feeding back into sport and nutrition, I think, they feed into each other.
yeah,
So you want to have other parts of your life going well as well. I know with myself, if I'm eating well, I'm more likely to be exercising a bit better.
yeah, it's a flow
My
on
sleep's
effect.
a bit better because
Yeah,
I know that I've got stuff to do the next day.
yeah,
And if one starts to go out of whack, then the others are more likely to as well.
yeah,
So it's you know they all work hand in hand with each other, and I think that's
mm,
a really big part of it. Not looking at one magic bullet, just
mm,
trying to see how that fits into the rest of our life
yeah.
and how we can improve it.
The flow on effect works positively and negatively.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, most definitely. I know with myself it definitely does, and yeah, I think in the times where I've been eating my best, other parts of my life are doing well as well.
mm.
So
I think as well online, a lot of the space is targeted towards fat loss or people that are maybe, trying to lose weight. But I think there's a fair amount of people that probably don't eat enough and don't understand that if you don't fuel your body correctly, you're not going to function correctly either.
yeah,
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 I
yeah.
think that's the other important.
Again, that's if I could use social media as an example, it's
Mm,
a lot of artificial stuff. People at their absolute best.
mm.
I know from men, like, they might be looking like that for 1 week of the year, and they'll go and get photo shoots, and they're
Yeah.
posting that throughout the year. Um, so yeah, and it's be something similar for women, probably, you know in a similar way. And it's, from a mental health perspective, if you're hungry, like you said, you're more likely to be
Mm.
irritable, and
Yeah.
a bit more likely to have negative emotions. And um, if you take a photo of someone on Instagram, don't know what mental state they're in, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
People that aren't eating enough, it's just as important to be fueling your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. I
No,
appreciate
awesome,
it.
man. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me on. Yeah.
Anytime. Thank you.
Cool.
Cheers.